Welcome, students, to Chapter 3. We're going to start with demand, okay? And my goal here is to cover all the most important things of figures 3.1 through 3.5. And so you'll find concepts related to those figures. Okay? All right. So how we're going to break out demand? Well, I'm going to introduce you to the demand concept using these typical questions, the demand function, the demand table, and I'm going to use all three of these to express demand in a graph, and then we're going to show how we can do some interesting things with a graph to explain what's happening to just one side of the market, which is the other side is supply. All right, so the two most important concepts in demand is price, which is referring to the price today of the good or service through which we're having a market defined for. And we're going to denote that with a P. And then its corresponding quantity demanded. And that is going to be given a QD for quantity demanded. Okay? All right. Let's take those two words. Let's move it on to the concept. Well, who? Who does the demand curve represent? It represents consumers. Now, we'll later on divide these consumers into buyers and non-buyers. Okay. Well, what are they consuming? Well, it's going to be a good or a service. In the case of the good that we're using in Chapter 3, that is the barrels of oil, okay? And so what is going to be our quantity demanded here? And it's going to be the quantity demanded of a good or service. In this case, it is barrels of oil. Where are these consumers going to get this good? Well, they're going to get it in a market. Okay. In this market, they're going to meet producers. So a market is any place where buyers and consumers and sellers or producers exchange. Okay. All right. When? Okay. Well, it's going to be expressed in periods, okay? Now, when we say we're talking about the demand curve, we're talking about today's demand curve. We're talking about the price. We're talking about today's price. So the relevant time period is the present, but quantities are going to express, per period. Okay? And so this quantity demanded is actually going to be expressed in million barrels of oil per day. Okay? And we can shorten this with the acronym with MBD, million barrels of oil per day. All right, why would consumers want to buy oil? Well, because they have some type of value for it. also denoted by willingness to pay. Okay, so they have some value for the oil and it has some willingness to pay. And how do they consume this? Well, they consume this by paying a price. And so they have to be willing and able to pay the market price, and they have to find a seller who's willing and able to sell at that market price. Okay, so there's your concept. Okay, so we can take all these concepts and bring it into a function, okay, a function that represents what determines the quantity demanded of oil. And so our dependent variable, so I'm just going to say dependent variable, is our quantity demanded, and it is a function of the independent variables. And the first one you'll be introduced to is the price of the good today, expressed price per barrel expressed in the good day, okay? And you already saw here that the quantity demanded is being shown on the horizontal axis. So horizontal axis, and the price of the good per barrel today is on the vertical axis. Okay. So go ahead and put that in here. Price per barrel. Okay. So you now know that all these things here have dollar signs, all these tick marks. And this will be the case for the rest of the semester, that when you're looking at graphs, dollar values are going to be on the vertical axis and quantity values are going to be on the horizontal axis. Okay, so what types of things motivate consumers to become buyers? Okay, well, the price of the good, okay? There's also other things here, okay? Such as, well, are they not only willing to pay, are they also able to pay? And that's determined based upon their income. Okay. Also, you can have more customers. So if more people are willing and able to buy the good, you're going to sell more at each and every price. And so the population of consumers is a factor. Then there's also the price of related goods, such as substitutes for the good. So I'm going to call that P-subs. The prices of complements, goods that you're consuming jointly, P-comp. Expectations, and finally, taste. Okay. All right, so we're adding all of those in here. So sorry about the crowding of space here, but we've got the price, which is on the vertical axis, and we got these other independent variables, which we'll talk about later. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to focus on the price per barrel of oil and the quantity of oil demanded in terms of million barrels per oil per day. And so for that, we can kind of build out a demand schedule, also known as a demand table. And so we'll put price and quantity demanded. Now in figure 3.1, they draw out this demand schedule and they start with a high price of $55. Then they drop the price to $20. and then they drop the price down to $5. Okay, so at a price of $55 per barrel, the quantity demanded of oil in million barrels of oil per day is going to be 5. Okay, and when the price falls to $20 per barrel, 25 million barrels of oil per day are demanded. And then when the price falls again, then the price goes to 5, and the quantity demanded is 50 million barrels of oil per day. And you'll see here that as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Okay, but we could just as easily have drawn the low prices first and had the prices rise, and we would see there that when the price is rising, the quantity demanded is falling. Okay, and this is known as the law of demand. Okay, all right, so the law of demand. So the law of demand is saying, holding all of these other things constant, there is an inverse relationship between the price of the good or service and the quantity demanded of it. Okay. What that means is that there is a negative relationship. That's another synonym that's being used. And it just says that the independent variable and the dependent variable are moving in opposite directions of each other. Okay, we can now take this demand table to explain the concept of a demand graph here. Now, I've already kind of labeled the axes, and that's very important. That's what you want to do first. Remember, cash variables are represented on the vertical axis, and quantity variables are represented on the horizontal axis. And so I'm just going to plot these 3 points as the y-coordinate and the x-coordinate of the respective demand curve is what we're going to draw here. So at 55, the quantity demanded is 5. And so about right here, we have if we were to do actual coordinates, we would have 5 barrels of oil, million barrels of oil per day when the price is 55. Okay, so there's our first point. Okay, then when the price drops to 20, we have 25 million barrels of oil per day. So about right here is our next point. And so we're going to say 25 million barrels of oil per day when the price is 20. And then when the price drops to $5, the quantity demanded is 50. And so 50 at $5 per barrel. Okay. And so if we connect these here, and we'll try to make it a little curved. We have our demand curve. Okay. Okay. So this shows that the slope of this curve is less than 0 at any point along here. Okay, so it doesn't matter if this line is straight or curved, the slope is always negative. Okay, and so this represents our law of demand. Okay, and it shows that as the price goes down, the quantity demanded increases. Now, in your textbook in Figure 3.2, they talk about reading the demand curve horizontally or vertically, okay? Now, if we're going to do this, I'm just going to do it for one point here, okay? So if I'm going to read horizontally, I'm going to start actually on the vertical axis. And then I'm going to go horizontally and say at a price of $20 per barrel, then I'm going to go down. The most that I'm willing and able to pay is 25 million barrels of oil per day. Okay. All right, so I can also read vertically. I could say I'll start on the horizontal axis and I'll go up vertically until I hit the demand curve, and I say if 25 million barrels of oil per day is produced, the most that consumers are willing and able to pay is $20 per barrel. Okay. All right, so just in review, if we think of the start being here, we go to the point, and then we drop down. That is our horizontal reading. And then if we go from the start, and we go up to the point, and then we go to the left, that is our vertical reading. Okay. You might think that you don't really need this right now, but the horizontal and vertical readings will help you not only read demand curves, it will help you read supply curves, it will help you read shifts of those curves, it will help you understand consumer surplus, producer surplus, equilibrium, a lot of things there. So there are two ways to read any point or any curve or any region on a graph here, and it's horizontal, starting from this axis, reading horizontally, and then going to the down, okay? Or vertical, starting on this axis, going up, and then going to the next axis, okay? So this will be where it would end up there. I forgot to put that part in there. Okay. All right. You might say like, okay, well, why? Okay. Remember, well, why is because they have value or willingness to pay. And so why does the demand curve slope downward? Why do people want to pay more? And why do people want to buy more when the price goes down? Okay. Well, when the price goes down, they are willing and able to buy more, okay? But also, goods can be used for different purposes. They can have high-valued consumers who have high-value uses and low-value consumers who have low-value uses. Or the same consumer could have high-value uses and lower-value uses of the same product, okay? Now, this y-coordinate of each point on this demand curve not only represents the price that might occur, it also represents their value, okay? So value is expressed in dollar terms, just as price is, okay? So this is price per barrel and the value, okay? And what value? Well, we're actually looking at it consecutively. So the value of the nth barrel. Okay? So this point here is telling you at the price of $55, the most that consumers are willing and able to buy is 5 million barrels of oil per day. That's the horizontal reading. But if we choose the vertical reading, we could say if 5 million barrels of oil per day is available, the most that consumers are willing and able to pay is $55 per barrel. But you could also read it saying for the 5 millionth barrel of oil produced per day, there is a consumer that has a value of $55 per barrel. And so what the demand curve does is it organizes uses of the good or service, in this case it's a good, from its highest value uses at the top to its lowest value uses at the bottom. And so what prices do is they actually ration out the goods such that the highest value uses are the ones being satisfied rather than the lowest value uses. Okay, so if we take this price of $20, we can segment out the higher value uses that become in which consumers become buyers, and the lower value uses where the consumers are non-buyers. So remember earlier when I introduced the concept that consumers can be defined as buyers and non-buyers? Well, it is the price which divides them. It rations out higher value uses from lower value uses. And this is the rationing mechanism of prices. Okay, all right, so what that means is that everyone who has a willingness and ability to pay above $20 becomes a buyer, and everyone who has a willingness and ability to pay below $20, a value less than $20, is a non-buyer. Now, when consumers buy this product, they are saving money because they were willing and able to pay more than they actually had to pay. And so there's a concept introduced in one of the figures known as consumer surplus. And that represents how much money these consumers save because they didn't have to pay how much they were willing to pay, their total value, which would be represented by the y-coordinate of this demand curve. Okay? And so we could sum up this surplus money left over they saved by not buying the product if we were to add up the consumer surplus generated by each consecutive barrel of oil from the first barrel to the 25 millionth barrel, in which the willingness to pay, the value of $20 is exactly equal to the price. And so all this area, if we added up the area together, would be your consumer surplus. Okay? And so that would just be the value minus the price for each unit sold added together. Okay. In the figure, it was one of your figures between 3.1 and 3.5, you'll see that you can approximate this consumer surplus as a function of the area of a triangle. Okay, we're not going to get to that in this video, but I just wanted to point that out. Okay. All right, so remember this demand curve is showing the relationship between the price of the good today and the quantity demanded of that good today in million barrels of oil. Okay? All other things being held constant are held constant until they're not. And when they're not, we are going to shift the demand curve. Okay? We're going to move the entire demand curve because the relationship between price today and the quantity demanded is already represented by this demand curve. Okay? We can't add in these other independent variables without drawing an entirely new demand curve because otherwise we'd have to draw like multiple dimensions, which would just really hard to visualize. Okay, so in this situation, we're going to have call this the old demand curve, and we're going to have a new demand curve, okay? And I'm going to pick one simple variable. Let's just say that this good, oil, is a normal good, okay, and our income increases, okay. Well, if it's a normal good, what that means is that consumers want to buy more at each price if they have an increase in income. So when the economy is doing better, more people's income is growing, and so they're going to want to increase their demand there. Okay, so remember how I talked about horizontal and vertical reading? Okay, so we can show an increase in demand horizontally by saying at the price of $20, consumers are willing and able to buy more units. In this case, 40 units, okay, at the price of $20. And we can also look at it vertically. We could say for the 25th millionth barrel of oil per day, that consumer now has a higher value for it because they have more income. They're more willing and more able to pay for that product. And so we'll have a vertical reading that would say when 25 million barrels of oil per day is produced, consumers are willing and able to buy more. Okay, and so we could say that their value is $30 here. And so we could connect these 2 points and draw a new demand curve. Okay, so I know it's a little messy, but we have effectively packed in 5 figures onto one screen into one video here. Okay, and so this new demand that we're showing here is an increase in demand. And this was shown by a shift to the right and upwards, okay? But I like to say it just shifts right because the horizontal reading to me is the most intuitive. So what this means is that for the demand curve, we could pick other points here. We could say at each and every price, consumers are willing and able to buy more of the product. Or at each and every price, the quantity demanded is higher than it was before. So a new demand curve, shown by this line here, is a shift right of the demand curve, okay? So that would be the horizontal reading there, okay? Now, I'm not going to draw this part there, but you can imagine if you have the opposite change in income, if you had a decrease in income that would occur perhaps during a recession, then you would have a leftward shift of the demand curve, okay? And people would not be willing and able to buy as much at each and every price, and they would not be willing to pay as much for the same quantity. Okay? So the rest of these independent variables are just going to be shifting the existing demand curve to the right for an increase or to the left for a decrease. Okay? So a lot of these same concepts that we took the time to break down in terms of reading the graph and going from a table to a graph and understanding what the vertical and horizontal axes represent will carry over to supply. And so you'll see that in the next video. I'll see you then.